Margaret had spent 42 years believing she was the luckiest woman alive. A beautiful home in Connecticut, a successful husband named Robert, a daughter in college, and a life that looked from the outside like everything a woman could want. But on the morning of her 67th birthday, alone in the kitchen while Robert was supposedly at a conference in Denver, she opened the wrong drawer looking for a birthday card she had tucked away for herself, a silly habit she had kept since her 30s, buying her own card when she knew no one else would remember. And instead of a card, she found a phone. Not Robert's main phone, a second phone, a small prepaid device that had no reason to exist in her kitchen drawer except one reason, the worst reason. And when she turned it on with shaking hands and read the messages saved inside, she did not find what she expected. She did not find another woman. She found something far worse. She found conversations between her husband and a lawyer about a property that belonged to her, a piece of land her mother had left her in rural Tennessee. And in those messages, Robert had written something she would never forget. He had written, "She has no idea what it is worth. Keep moving forward." Her birthday cake was still on the counter. She had baked it herself that morning. She had met Robert when she was 24, and he was 30. And from the beginning, he had carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who knows exactly where he is going and expects others to follow. She had followed him through 3 cities, through 2 decades of his career building and her career quietly setting aside, through the raising of their daughter Emily, through the silent years when the house felt too large and the conversations felt too rehearsed. And through all of it, she had told herself that this was simply what long marriages looked like, that the distance between 2 people who had been together 40 years was not coldness but familiarity, not absence but comfort, not something. She had been wrong. She understood this now with the clarity that only arrives when the evidence is sitting in your hand and cannot be explained away. She set the phone back in the drawer exactly where she had found it. She closed the drawer. She went upstairs to the bathroom and ran cold water over her wrists, the way her mother had taught her to do when she was overwhelmed. And she looked at herself in the mirror and made herself a promise. She would not react. She would not confront. She would not give Robert the advantage of knowing that she knew. She would do what her mother had always told her a smart woman does when the ground shifts beneath her. She would find out everything first. Her mother Dorothy had been a quiet woman from a small town outside Nashville who had grown up with very little and had held on to what little she had with both hands. She had inherited a piece of land from her own father, 40 acres of mostly wooded Tennessee hillside that no one in the family had ever thought much about. And when she died 7 years ago, she had left it to Margaret alone, not to Margaret and Robert jointly, a fact that had struck Margaret as slightly odd at the time, but that she had attributed to her mother being old-fashioned, preferring to keep things in the family name. Margaret had never questioned it. She understood now, standing at the bathroom sink on her birthday with Robert's secret phone burning a hole in her memory, that her mother had not been old-fashioned. Her mother had been smart. Her mother had known something. She called a woman named Susan Hartley the next morning, an attorney she had used once 12 years ago for a small estate matter, and whose card she had kept in the back of her address book, for no reason she could have explained at the time except instinct. Susan was 60 years old, and had the calm, measuring voice of someone who has heard every variation of human deception and remains unshockable. Margaret described what she had found. She described the messages on the phone, the lawyer's name she had seen in the conversation, the references to her Tennessee property. She described the way Robert had written, "She has no idea what it is worth," with the ease of someone who has been saying it for years. Susan was quiet for a moment after Margaret finished. Then she asked one question. "How long ago did your mother leave you that property?" 7 years, Margaret said. Susan said, "I want you to find the deed. I want you to find every document your mother ever gave you related to that land. And I want you to find them before Robert comes home from Denver." Margaret spent the rest of that day in the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. The cabinet Robert had always called her mother's paperwork pile with a kind of dismissive fondness that she now understood had been something else entirely. She found the deed. She found the survey from 1987. She found her mother's original will and the letter that accompanied it, a letter written in her mother's small, careful handwriting that she had read once when it arrived, and then put away because the grief of that period had made it impossible to sit with. She read it again now. In it, her mother had written something that stopped her completely. She had written, "Margaret, I don't know exactly what that land holds, but a man came to see me last spring asking questions about it, and offering money, and something about the way he asked made me feel that he knew more than he was saying. I turned him down. I changed my will. That land is yours and yours alone, and I want you to keep it that way. I trust you to know what to do. The letter was dated 8 years ago, 1 year before her mother died. The man who had come asking questions had come 8 years ago. Robert and Margaret had visited her mother 6 months before her death. Margaret thought about that visit now, thought about Robert and her mother in the kitchen together while Margaret walked in the back field, thought about how quiet her mother had been on the drive home, a quietness Margaret had attributed to age and tiredness, and the natural distance that sometimes grows between people at the end of their lives. Her mother had not been tired. Her mother had been watching. She photographed every document. She sent the photographs to Susan. She put everything back exactly where she had found it, and she went downstairs and finished the birthday cake she had baked for herself, and she ate a slice alone at the kitchen table, and she thought about her mother, and about the kind of love that does not make speeches, but builds walls around the things that matter and trusts the right person to find them. Susan called 2 days later with information that settled over Margaret like cold water. The Tennessee property, those 40 acres of wooded hillside that no one had thought much about for 3 generations, sat directly above one of the most significant natural gas deposits identified in that part of the state in the past decade. A drilling company had been quietly acquiring mineral rights in the surrounding area for 6 years. Robert, through a shell company Margaret had never heard of, had been in contact with that drilling company for 5 years. He had attempted twice to file paperwork that would have transferred Margaret's mineral rights to a jointly held entity, paperwork that had her name on it, and that Susan examined carefully before telling Margaret in the measured language of someone being precise about a serious thing, that the signatures on those documents were not hers. Robert had been patient. Robert had been careful. Robert had spent 5 years working toward a transaction worth several $1 million involving land that belonged entirely to his wife, land he had planned to take from her without her knowledge, because he had understood correctly that if she knew its value she would never have handed it over. What he had not understood, had never factored into his calculations, was Dorothy. He had not understood that a quiet woman from a small town outside Nashville had seen him clearly from the beginning, had recognized in him the specific quality of a man who measures everything in terms of what he can acquire from it, and had done the one thing within her power to stop him. She had died with her daughter's name on the deed, and a letter in the filing cabinet, and the faith that Margaret would eventually find her way to both. Margaret filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning. She did not tell Robert it was coming. She had extended every consideration to this man for 42 years, and he had used every one of them, and she was finished with consideration. She packed one bag, a single methodical bag containing what actually mattered, the documents, the photographs, her mother's letter, the small box of her grandmother's jewelry that Robert had always found quaint, and she drove south toward Tennessee toward a piece of land she had not visited in 7 years, toward 40 acres of hillside that her mother had held onto with both hands and had left to her alone. And as she drove, she thought about her mother in the kitchen. The land was overgrown when she arrived. The old cabin at the edge of the property where her grandparents had lived was still standing, barely. The roof soft in 2 places and the porch uncertain underfoot. But the walls were solid, and the foundation had not moved, and the view from the back of the property, down across the hillside to the valley below, was exactly as she remembered it from childhood summers. Exactly as her mother had described it in the letter, the thing worth holding onto. She stood at the edge of the back field in the late afternoon light and looked down at the valley and breathed the particular air of a place that has been waiting for you. She called Susan from the field. She called Emily from the field. Emily was 38 and lived in Austin, and she arrived 4 days later and walked the property beside her mother and listened to the full account of what Margaret had found and what her grandmother had left and what her father had tried to take. And when Margaret finished, Emily was quiet for a long moment with the particular quality of someone absorbing a truth that reorganizes the architecture of everything they thought they understood. Then she said, "Grandma Dorothy always said Dad was charming." Like it wasn't quite a compliment. She had never said that out loud before. Neither had Margaret. They said it now. The licensing agreement took 8 months to negotiate. Margaret did it through Susan with the patience of someone who has learned that the most valuable things are worth moving carefully toward. She selected a company whose terms respected the land and whose operational history showed a pattern of working with property owners rather than around them. The royalty structure was built to last decades. The first payment arrived on a gray morning in November, and Margaret sat at the kitchen table of the cabin she had restored over those 8 months. A practical and unglamorous restoration done with her own hands and the help of 2 local contractors she had found through the hardware store in the nearest town. And she read the figure on the statement twice, not because she doubted it, but because it deserved to be read twice. And then she looked out the window at the back field where she called Emily. She sat with her coffee and thought about Robert, who was by then in the middle of legal proceedings that Patricia had described as not going well for him. And she found that she did not feel what she had expected to feel. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even the clean, cool relief of justice. She felt simply finished. She felt the particular quality of someone who has set down a weight they carried so long they forgot it was extra, and is now feeling for the first time what their own posture actually is. She was 67 years old, and she was beginning. Not recovering, not surviving. Beginning in the full sense of a person who has arrived at the right place with everything they actually need, which turned out to be less than she had thought, and exactly what her mother had made sure to leave her. If you have ever looked at the life you built and realized the foundation was not what you believed, if you have ever had someone in your corner who showed their love not with words, but with the quiet architecture of preparation, if you have ever found out that what was taken from you never actually reached the person who tried to take it, share this story with someone who needs to hear that the land beneath your feet, if it was given with love, holds. And if this story stayed with you, hit subscribe, because every week we bring you the women who prove that starting over is not the end of the story. It is where the real story begins.